Will do. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another software co-op meetup. This month, we will be talking about a chapter from Reinventing Startups on transparency and how it's important and applicable for cooperatives and distributed groups that are self-organizing. We have one of the authors of Reinventing Startups, Travis Marsh, on with us. Hey, Travis.
Howdy.
A few other folks have joined us from the Spiral, and we may groups, and we may have a few other people step in during this. This is recorded. It's going to be on YouTube live stream. And if you want to participate, you can add some comments on the YouTube area or join otherwise. I'm gonna, let's see. Let me go ahead and bring up the share Lucina has here. Awesome. So we have, I guess we'll do some quick intros. Over on our side, we have Lucina, who's did the primary dig in on this chapter, and she's put together some slides for us to have some talking points. Watson, who's done quite a few of the talks. Sarah's here with us, and a couple other folks on the Vulk side. And then we have Travis here. Travis, why don't I give it to you real quick, and you can give your intro.
Yeah, excellent, thanks. So I got involved with everything around thinking differently about organizational design just the last couple of years. Before that, my background, I was a software engineer for a while, and then I was in sales and sales management at tech companies for a while. And it was really like when I got into management and I just sucked at it really bad, that I realized that there was a lot more stuff going on behind the hood, right? And it was the first time where like my typical like, all right, I'm going to just work harder. That's going to be my answer to get out of this. Like actually made things progressively worse and worse because I wasn't really realizing what was going on with everybody else. And it's like it became the most fascinating and interesting like engineering problem where there's massive amounts of variables and everything is different and it's an incredibly complex system, but there are like better ways to tackle a lot of these things. And a lot of them, again, with my engineering roots, go back to first principles, right? Like, do I actually fundamentally trust that other people are smart, hardworking people, or do I think they are constantly trying to screw me over? And like looking at decisions through that lens was really what helped change my entire perspective and kind of led me down this path and like through organizational design and change management and coaching and collaboration and facilitation all the way to going like, all right, there's a lot of really good stuff from reinventing organizations to deliberately developmental organizations with an everyone culture, which is another phenomenal book, or two phenomenal books, I should say. But I wanted to have something like a little bit more practical and tangible, and so that's what we're trying to collect with this book, is just what's everybody's lived experience on things that are like they're trying, the experiments that y'all are running, and like what's working and what's not.
Awesome. I appreciate that background. Can you tell us a little bit about the motivation specifically behind reinventing startups? It sounds like we got a pretty good history of where you're coming up to that, and then your collaboration maybe with Susan and Brent on the book itself.
Yeah, so it actually kind of started with a South by Southwest presentation that we were all putting together about this time last year, which South by Southwest just being like the conference down in Austin, where I had a chance to meet some of the Vulk people, and we wanted to talk about what was going on. We were thinking, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be talking about self-managed companies this year, and like once again, nobody else was talking about it. Like it's easy for us to get trapped in the bubble, but like while we were preparing for that, we're like, it'd be really nice to be able to give something a little bit more concrete. And so it turned from like an ebook to like a real book, and it just kept on growing. Thankfully, we had a hard deadline to actually just ship it and get out the door. And so, you know, it's certainly in like a rough stage right now, and like I'm actually in the middle. You caught me at a good time. I was working on updating the transparency chapter actually this week. So there will be future revs that have some more information. Hopefully, some of it will be informed by like some of the challenges that we talk about, and maybe some of the ideas and solutions that we also explore on today's call.
Awesome. I'm excited to be a part of that. Okay, let me switch back over here. So, how is the book Reinventing Startups relevant to cooperatives? That's one of our passions, of course, for us. And there's a lot of things in here that seems geared towards cooperatives. So we wanted to look at how the specific parts are applicable to us and maybe other cooperatives. Lucinda, could I hand over to you?
Sure. In looking at reinventing startups, we are a cooperative and we don't really fit the mold of a hierarchy organization where there's one leader and then everyone falls in line. It's more of a democratic decision making and a more of a flat organization. So in looking at this reinventing startups and how it can be useful for cooperatives, we just put together some bullet points about us. So we started in November of 2013. So we're still very much in that startup phase within the first 5 years of operation. And we do the democratic decision making, one partner, one vote, and we have 4 partners or 4 member owners and about 8 to 12 associates. And we're a self-managed group, so we're a self-managed group of partners and associates all kind of working together. And we're a remote and distributed team, so we've got a good representation of our group here in Austin. And we've got folks who are in Dallas and in Houston, New Zealand, and Boston, you name it. Yeah, so we're all over the place. So that has a few challenges. And we've been trying to use an agile approach to software development. So this book, Reinventing Startups, definitely touched on the agile approach versus the waterfall approach because we are more of a flat and more of a collaborative group. Some areas of concern that we try to address, both in our daily stand-ups and our retrospectives and our planning meetings and our monthly meetups is how can we encourage the trust and openness and autonomy with our member owners and our associates. That's kind of an ongoing thing that we actually talk about every Friday in our governance meetings. And how can we share goals and encourage commitment and accountability? And how can we help other cooperatives? Part of our long-term strategy is to be involved and build a network of cooperatives. So how can we use some of these, use this toolkit to help inform our long-term plans? And how can we grow and scale? So those are some of the touch points that I think that this book can help. So I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. So why is transparency so important? That's the topic here. Why increase transparency? So these are some items that we have, and I know Travis, you had some thoughts on around this. So we'll maybe go over some of these, and then I'd like to open it up for you to talk about your thoughts on that. We have some other people in that as well. So creating a shared understanding with this remote group. If you're with a team that's all together in an office, then you're going to see a lot of the stuff daily. And it's important. It can be hidden with silos and big companies. It becomes a really important to prioritize transparency in a group that's distributed like ours. We want to build that trust, allowing the team to be vulnerable, and being able to have those shared goals. So we're collaborating on stuff. We have sprints doing the agile. So if we talk on trying to share tasks and get through some things, if you don't have visibility on what's happening in a remote group like this, then you're not going to know where the dependencies or where someone's blocked. Those are some of the things that I've seen. Want to talk a little bit about the against, the conflict?
Sure. Well, the toolkit kind of mentions more about why people wouldn't want to why more people wouldn't want to include transparency in their organization. So some of the touch points in the book are letting go of power, because reporting information is a way to ensure job security at some places with not as open values. Also, some folks can be overloaded by information if too much is shared, too often. It's hard to see what is urgent and what's important if the sky is falling and here's a dump of all the information. Can't quite see the forest through the trees. And it also takes time and energy to share information and to find the way that folks want to learn. So you could do a dump, do a Google Drive, and just like say read it. And some folks that just won't work as well. So taking the time to find out everyone's preferences and meeting them where they are to try to reach them in the best way that's going to kind of work and make them feel heard. And also, one thing is the more people know, the more chance there is for conflicts. So what are some other items, Travis, that you've found or that you've been including in the transparency portion?
Yeah, and I was just reviewing. Mackenzie had a really good article in their quarterly newsletter, and good. Obviously, Mackenzie has like a different customer base than startups that want to organize in a different way, and so they were talking all about the hidden risk and the hidden downside of transparency, and called out a lot of different pieces, some of which that you just mentioned here, especially in large organizations, right, and things that are moving quickly. There's a lot of information overload and people second guessing or having incomplete context to be able to like piece together a lot of this. We've probably all experienced, like at some point along the way, a chance where you've gathered a lot of information and there's a lot of good stuff. It spurs a lot of good initial conversation, and then that conversation moves the information and people's collective opinions, but the information that's captured in the system doesn't really reflect it. It still reflects that initial snapshot and maybe a little bit of addition, but is really hard to get the time context from a lot of documentation systems. Or you get something like Slack or Lumio, where you get like just the most recent thoughts, but it doesn't have as much of the context on what the important decisions or the fundamental principles are. So those are like competing challenges that are, again, called out on here, right? Like the time and energy that's there, the conflict and the information overload. But really some real world examples on that, or at least some situational ones. But there's like a level that's a little bit before this as well. And like there's transparency as a fundamental value. Like I think people are fundamentally capable of growing and developing. I think they're fundamentally trying to do things in the best interest. But that is not a decision that you can make or is appropriate in all situations, right? Like, I don't think anybody wants our governments to just be completely transparent with all the information that they're collecting, with the bad of what they think is bad actors, right? Because there's risks, and there's some people, at least some percentage of people in the world, where they will take advantage of that. So what is safe enough for your group very much depends on like what your group is working on and like what the focus is, right? For software co-ops, it becomes a lot easier to narrow down that scope.
Awesome.
And I could go on, but I'd be more interested in like gathering this as like a group conversation, because there's a lot of really smart people that have been working on this for quite a while, between Vulk and Spiral, and I'm sure there's more here as well. So I don't know if we should lay like a little bit of grounding on like some cool examples on what's going on, and then maybe bring it together for a group conversation. How does that sound?
All right.
Yeah, sure. And there's also, on the side, there's a collaborative notepad, so Mix has been coming up with some questions. So I definitely want to make sure that everyone's heard and can chime in.
Brilliant. Love it. And I'm just clicking over that myself. Excellent. Yeah, I love the questions that I see coming up there. And then just a couple of examples. One that I saw that was fun, and maybe I'll just share a screen because I've got a horrible little pic that I just took with my phone. I'll share there. This one was one I was just doing an interview for the book over from Menlo Innovations, which is like a 42-person software company over in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Rich Sheridan was the author of Joy Inc., for anybody that read that. And like this one was one that really stood out to me on transparency. This is the level, and also in effect the pay of everybody at the company, or the hourly rate of everybody at the company. So each one of these little pads has like a little three or four letter initials for each person. And like they actually go and move and promote people via coming over here and moving them up. And there's like a specific amount of pay difference between each of theirs 18 levels. There's 3 in associate, then consultant, senior consultant, and principal all have 5 each. And so like just a great way of seeing like a little transparency on that. And they had another cool system I liked as well. This was like their little real-time board on what all 42 people in the company are working on this week with the individual projects, right? They're a software consultancy, so they're working on other people's projects, but everybody can see what everybody is working on, and how much they're in or out of the office for any given week. A couple of little cool transparent systems that I thought of our sale recently.
Awesome.
Yeah, this little call out that you had there. 100% transparency may not be appropriate, but move towards sharing more.
Right, and there's transparency, like, and there's two ways to think of transparency. They're a pretty big divide, right? Like transparency within the company and outside, right? And I mean, even with Vulk, that's like a non-obvious delineation, right, between your partners and then the other consultants that are a part of Vulk. Like, does everybody have the same access to the same information? Is there anything that it becomes scarier, feels scarier to share across a broader group, right? Could be one. And, you know, kind of same like in Spiral is doing some interesting things with livelihood pods that I'm sure Mix could talk to a lot better than I could. But I'm sure there's, if nothing else for time, there's a lot of information that's shared within those, you know, 4 to 6 person livelihood pods that might not be appropriate for the broader network, or just might not make sense to take the time to share as well. Right? And you know, like the lasting impact of sharing things once, right? You can't unshare something that you've put on the internet. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe this is a great time to get a couple other voices chiming in on. Like, I like Mix's first question there. Like, what's people's experience with transparency on what's been great and what's been hard or not worked?
I can start in on that. So my experience around transparency, I've been in a few organizations who highly value it. For example, when I was working in Lumio, building that, transparency was a high priority. We quickly found, though, that, so for example, things we wanted to people to have access to was a view of what we were building for the collaboration tool. It was really important that we engaged the people who we were affecting with our decisions and the decision making around the platform. What we found was that that's incredibly expensive. If you want to engage people externally, you need to give them a huge amount of context, and a huge amount of detail needs to be sort of documented, which is something that was mentioned in this chapter you need to invest in. So yeah, we started thinking about accessibility versus transparency. It's like one thing to throw up a spreadsheet. We were interested in being transparent about our budgets as well. It's one thing to throw up a spreadsheet, but probably everyone's had that experience where somebody gives you a spreadsheet and you're like, what is this? This is like the inside of someone's brain. It's really hard to translate. Yeah, so I think since then, transparency that I've seen succeeding really well and being a good time is mainly just committing to writing down your thoughts, writing down notes and meetings, and yeah, documenting decisions, all of that sort of basic stuff. Yeah, and I think sort of writing like mini blog posts, means that at least there's a stub or a link which people can pass around or ask for further information on. So not necessarily trying to make everything totally accessible, but at least being open to the conversations and making a little bit of an effort. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. Someone else have thoughts or comments before we move on to the next part. We had a couple of people join. Welcome. Hi, Greg.
I'd love to hear about other people's experience with transparency. Maybe Vulk could speak to that question about transparency. Like, for example, what sort of transparency have you had between your associates and your partners, or maybe Travis, external to the company as well? I wasn't quite sure.
Sure. I can talk for a bit. There's a couple things or notes that I have for transparency. One of them, Sarah might be pretty familiar with. It's kind of like the panopticon, the Foucauldian view of if someone's watching you, you tend to act right. So it's interesting that there is this underlying, almost like a little nefarious part of transparency that we're trying to slip in there, and use that as kind of the stick versus the carrot. Thanks. The thing that's just a note. So one of the things that that jumped out to me as far as the transparency. So there's a couple books here, but one of them is The Function of the Executive. I think they use it here at the Macomb School for teaching about leadership. But one of the arguments is that the hierarchies are great for distributing information, and since we're all tech here, or most of us, it's kind of like PubSub. You have like this focal point, and then they give you the information that you need, and you don't get overwhelmed. So you don't have this big chatty network. You can think of it like that. When you don't have that, when you're flatter, then that's something that we wrestle with. How do you solve that? You have people that are used to hierarchies, and they come in and they want to say, well, the simple stuff like, well, who do I talk to get paid? Okay, talk to that person. But they don't really have a title for the person that pays me. Okay, well, still talk to that person. Right? So you have that side, and everybody getting blasted with all this information, trying to make it to where there's some type of way to subscribe to what you need versus giving everybody everything. That's something I'm kind of passionate about, or want answers on, or want to explore, or whatever.
I'm quite a big fan of building maps. So I'll just start like a document which has the things that I think are useful, like what do I need to onboard myself into this organization? And then I start making notes. And then that sort of often behaves like a seed crystal. It sort of just attracts information as people find it more useful. And there's no reason somebody couldn't build their own map of the organization and what they think is useful. So in that way, you don't have to have it's Mix's hierarchy of how he sees things, but it's not like it's the canonical one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess, there's the people who are very resilient and they get blasted with all the info. And there's the people who are absolutely non-tolerant of that and trying to get from most people are in hierarchies. So trying to onboard people into this flat thing where the information just gets blasted to everyone. That's kind of, the people that are tolerant will, I'm going to make a mind map or what have you, and this person's going to go to, and we can recommend that to people. We've run into people who are absolutely not tolerant of that, or they really want to be told and they want someone to have a title and these types of things, and it's a training thing.
What have you done for that? Have you ended up parting ways? Have you found ways to tackle it?
Parting ways has happened.
I mean, if the tolerance is, if it's too far on that spectrum, to me, it kind of sounds like people that are really good at structuring and they want everything to have its place, categorizing. And if you're coming in and there is nothing and they're supposed to do it, then they can be consumed with just trying to find the place before they can ever get to the next part. So we have an FAQ for new associates, and being that some of us are more on the side of able to consume the information, just have it, we've been able to handle it. But as we've noticed, okay, this is not as easy to find, then we'll update our FAQ, and then we have a smaller one on the partner member side where usually by the time you've gotten into that, you have an understanding. But that is on the associate FAQ, it is kind of following. Here's the steps that you do that, and going back and forth. And then I'd say for most people, it's trying to get them in where they feel comfortable, wherever their skills and background, how do they like to communicate, and then get in with them and collaborate with them. So now they're seeing you work through something and they'll pick up a little bit. Oh, okay, so this is where we go for this sort of thing. This is where we go for this. And then every once in a while, throw them something, not intentionally, but it usually just kind of happens. Here's something new. And if they're comfortable enough, they'll stretch. And if they're not, they'll hopefully come back to you. So trying to make enough space in the work and our own personal times and the people they're making that you can collaborate is probably the biggest thing versus tools or anything else.
I'm a big, people don't read. If you put something in an FAQ or document or whatever, they're not going to read it. I haven't seen that maybe 10% of people might read something or whatever, I don't know. But it's kind of like a perfect excuse. Like, where's the documentation? That's kind of, it's really, if you have the documentation, which we will.
Yes.
There's people still won't read it. So there's another, it ends up being pairing up with someone. It's probably the best way. What we found.
I think there's a little bit of comfort on knowing those. And if you're saying coming from a hierarchy and you're not used to it, like being able to have those touch points, okay, here's the way to do it. There. Then you feel a little bit better to go in and try something new. Yeah. One thing beyond that we've done that's, I guess, in between collaborating and the mentoring side, during the onboarding process, Lucina's been really working on this. Is we use take that list of things to do during the onboarding that's in the FAQ that would become overwhelming anyways because it's too much content. And she's created a template in a to-do list. It happens to be on Basecamp and be wherever. And then you have, here's what the Vulk mentor, whoever is onboarding, would do, and here's something they could do, and they can collaborate back and forth. And what we've found on top of that is to actually not just hand it off, but say, okay, we're going to spend some time on this Friday morning. We're going to start going through your list and focus on the parts that are most relevant. So you have a checklist of items, so that feels good and they're going through. And then you have the collaboration on that. What does this mean? What is all this about? Some people have never invoiced before. Like, how do I do that? I might track my time at some job, but I've never turned that into an invoice and requested money and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff to learn from game design in this, right? Like with the scaffolding and onboarding. is a lot of the stuff and the transparency that you're talking about. And game design gets us to do all sorts of really boring things, and where we feel good about it, right? Like that we're feeling like we're in control of the situation. So it's like you were saying with the checklist, right? Like, oh, I'm going through and I'm getting these things done just like I'm supposed to, right? And you can even up the level of that a little bit by making that like the responsibility for updating that, or like accomplishing some of the prizes, right? Like the prize of figuring out how to submit an invoice and who sends the money and how to get your bank routing number in is a paycheck. So that's a pretty nice incentive, right? And there's nothing quite like as motivating for reading documentation or just trying to get into the system as knowing what you're going to get out of the other side and having a clear view on that goal.
It's on a badge.
I mean, like
Yeah.
Oh, really?
You
It would like
graduate
it.
to
It
a
would work.
t-shirt.
Right.
Yeah.
First you start with the crop top, and then you can have the real t-shirt, and then you can have the hoodie.
I mean, my partner was trying to teach her mother how to use Facebook for like 6 years. And then her mom was single and needed to message somebody, and she figured out everything she needed in about a day, right? 6 years to a day, it wasn't a problem of the usability of it or her capability. It was all about motivation and what the clear goal was for her.
I'd love to hear if anyone else has experiences around transparency, or like, good or bad. Are there any other organizations or groups that we haven't heard from?
I suppose I could toss in that I worked at a development agency in Austin, Springbox. I don't know if anybody here has worked with Springbox or knows them. They're a really great company. I have never seen as many people happy to be at the office as I've seen at Springbox. They had an interesting style of their hiring, which is incredibly transparent, which was that they would get the development team all in a circle to discuss any new hire that was being looked at. They would go around every single person. They would have everybody do an interview with this person, and they would have everybody know something about this new hire, make sure that everybody had positive feelings about it. And I was just contracting there, but they had me involved in this as well. And the real point of this was to make sure that the sense of how people got onto that team was not just transparent, but also communal. That this was somebody that everybody began to know and understand and feel good about. And it left a pretty big impression on me, because you could tell that somebody coming in you wouldn't just kind of get lost in the crowd or sit at your desk and just be some new person there. Everybody basically knew who you were and was involved in why you were there and what's particularly useful or great about you being there. And I thought that was maybe one of the best examples of transparency taken to what I thought to be a pretty extreme point, because they had to stop production for the entire morning to do this every time they had a hire. But it seemed to work really well for them.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Thanks for sharing. Let's see here. I would like to, can you bring up your slides again, listener? Seems like there's some points on the, are you ready for transparency? And maybe, or we could go right into the next ones.
Yep, we've got about 15 minutes. Share the slides as well.
Yeah, Max, we're resharing. Oh,
They're there now.
Okay, cool. And we'll send this out, share the slides after. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, prior to the meetup, Taylor sent out a Google form to kind of get a poll of which topic folks who have attended our past and expressed interest in our meetups, which topics from the book they'd be interested in exploring more. And unsurprisingly, because we do have such a diverse group, and all of our learning styles are different, all of our personality styles are different, and we really didn't have a consensus. Everyone really wanted to talk about a different chapter in the book. So we started with transparency, and we thought that we could extend an olive branch and ask kind of how does transparency help with some of these other topics that you run into. So how would it help with feedback, accountability, decision making? And maybe we can only scratch the surface today and then see if this is one of these other topics would be something for a next meetup.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, and I think like exploring this through the lens on what have people seen that they're working from either the companies they're in or the places they're adjacent to could be really interesting, right? Like one that was an idea that was spurred for me when Mix was talking about kind of decision making was along product roadmaps. And I'm starting to see more companies put out something that looks like a general level one. I shared the Slack's developer product roadmap since that's the platform that I'm working on a lot. And that one doesn't allow upvoting, but I've seen some other companies kind of add some transparency on like where customers can weigh in and like upvote features and make comments on like why they need them, so that there can be some transparency and collaborative decision making between customers and companies. The software world, I thought that'd apply. I'm curious what other people have seen.
I've been reading about Crisp, which is a consultancy in Sweden, and pretty inspired by what they're doing. They definitely have some transparency around. The main thing they have transparency around is their what they call their happiness index, which sounds really hippie on the surface, but they're adamant that happiness is the thing that they want to optimize, and that it's actually everyone fills in how happy they're feeling, and everyone can see how happy everyone else is, which makes it really easy to quickly surface where there are problems or like what's gone wrong. In fact, they go so far as to say that happiness is a leading indicator, or like a whereas if you look at money as your like primary thing that you have transparency around, it's a lagging indicator, and generally the money starts going bad well after you've had some other, some pretty significant problems.
I'll share one more story from Menlo Innovations, just maybe since it's top of mind, where, and I agree that money is often a lagging indicator. I also think that like transparency around financials is something that can be really important. And so they were putting up all of their money in and money out like on a weekly basis on a big board, and they had like the last 4 to 5 months up at any given time. And they were on the 4th or 5th iteration of trying to do this. And what they found was that like the first couple of times, like until people had decisions that were related to why the money was up there, then they didn't really care, or they just found bad stuff that was going on, right? But like when they started doing it and they had to actually do a little bit of furloughing, like people had to be working less because money wasn't coming in as much, that everybody got interested And what they found was actually like one of the challenges they were having is they actually weren't delivering as much work as had been sold for whatever reason, and then because of that they didn't have the money. So what appeared to be a sales problem for them was actually something like was more of a scheduling challenge, which was interesting. But another variant of that, which was also pretty fascinating, was some like even screw-ups that he was just telling me about from like the last week on like they've got some co-working space that's in there, and they've got some networking equipment that's been down, and they've been trying to raise their safety net to like the number of weeks they want to have, like 12 weeks of pay in the bank. And they, like they just pulled everybody, like everybody's back working full, like as much time as they want. Nobody's furloughed or anything else like that. But people have been, the person responsible for upgrading the network equipment, like did not like upgrade that equipment as fast as he might have, because he was paying close attention to the financials and going like, we need more money in the bank. It's the right thought, but it has some small negative consequences. So like all of these things are like a small, or in this case it was small, but it was one of those ones where decision making and transparency were tightly coupled. Huge opportunity for growth, learning, development, and like good stuff that came out of it. But it's easy to see how going too quickly with transparency too broadly can have some ripple and some challenges built into it as well. So it's, again, like what's the right level for any group?
It's interesting.
I got a couple things. So one, basically, if the group, the population can't vote, then the transparency to me is meaningless or close to meaningless. So, that's just one thing. So we can have the transparency, use it kind of like a propaganda tool or rhetoric, like, hey, we're great with this transparency, but nobody can make any decisions, then, whatever. That's how I think of it. But considering that they can vote, and we have the opposite of the issue that I was saying before, where some people they want, well, they're getting blasted with information. The opposite of that, now everybody, given that everyone can vote, well, people might subscribe to only some things when they really do need more. So talk a little bit about, say, sales information. So a technical person oftentimes doesn't care about sales. They think that if they build a better mousetrap, the world will be the path to their door. And this just happens over and over again. And then knowing the value of sales and closing things and all that stuff, sometimes they're just like, I don't care about that, or whatever. But they can voting on the budget for sales, for marketing, and all this other stuff. And so the transparency, just pointing out that there's two sides of it. There's, okay, too much information, and then there's this, okay, you have to try to increase the intelligence of the populace by kind of saying, no, you will subscribe to some of this stuff. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, this was seeing that all the people had different thoughts on what they want. These feedback, accountability, decision making were just a few of them. I agree with you, Watson, on two sides. It feels like it's about not hiding the information to make silos, or it's the same thing as what you started with. If they don't have the ability to vote and direct themselves, then what's the meaning? So it's, if you're using information to exploit others by hiding the knowledge, that shouldn't be the point. So allowing transparency doesn't mean you're going to force all the information, but you're saying it's available, and then you still are going to need people that know, is this something that's helpful for you now, or is it too much? You probably need a bunch of other layers to tie in to help with making those choices. But I feel like if you don't have at least the intent for transparency, then you're either going to have silos that are going to happen purposely, or unintentionally they start happening. If someone doesn't have the ability to view, you're saying, no, this isn't your business, you can't look in, is different from you need to learn some. And I was saying the feedback, accountability, decision making, but I'm looking at all of these. I think it's all relevant. Some of the folks were saying we want to talk about power of purpose and the leadership, authority, power. So without transparency, and you talk about the leadership, authority, power mix, it talked earlier, like what's the difference between the members and associates. And if you want to build the trust so that people would want to join in, then showing for sure internally that there's that transparency between the members, and then people are saying as you're coming in and you have trust, you're going to gain that. I think it's important. And on these others, I don't think that you can hold people accountable if you're going to hide some of the information. Like if they say people are often held to be responsible for things they don't understand, and that ties in with like sales and the importance for hitting those numbers, and maybe some of the stuff that Travis and y'all have talked about with companies where it may be lagging. So you want the information and the knowledge around it. I was thinking this was a good basis to build from for any of the others. So with that, I think we're coming right up on the hour. Got a couple of minutes. Our next meetup next month is July 5th, Wednesday. That's US time zone, so Thursday again for folks over in New Zealand or other parts of the world. And let's see, would y'all like to continue down these discussions? I know we have some other topics that are kind of in the queue as well. You could easily go off and look at, so power of purpose. I know there was some comments during the meetup just a little while ago about purpose and motivation as far as in the company. Accountability and commitment come up a lot of times, like how are you going to get your team and everybody to get stuff done? How do you help someone like maybe the network engineer to accomplish his goals, and maybe that's partly mentoring or something else, but tying those in. These are all good topics to me. I think we could dig into any of them as topics. This book to me is a great place to start on conversations, and a lot of material and a lot of conversations from people in other groups. So if y'all have some thoughts, you can throw them out now. I will be putting a form out, Google form, to try to get some feedback as well. Okay. Good. Well, I will put that Google form out onto the YouTube Hangout on Air, and on the Meetup, send it out in a few places. Love to have some feedback and carry on these conversations. Thanks, Mix, for throwing this shared notes up. You don't see it, but I have a split screen on our end showing those. I appreciate it. I'd love to send a link if this is going to stay online, or do something where we can tie it all together with the conversation. Thanks, everyone. Travis, thank you for joining and helping to with bringing this chapter and discussion. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks.
Cheers.